You see that providers are really starving for more autonomy, flexibility, and freedom in their life. Not only that, the future of work is, definitely upon us, and, work from home culture and all these things. And doctors and NPs and PAs and the like are seeing their friends and other people have flexibility in how they work. And so it's no wonder that, more doctors want to be able to do telemedicine, and it's no wonder that they want to be able to split their time in different modes of home and work and, clinic and everything, right? And they want to have more ownership of their career and more flexibility and more freedom.
Let's discover the Cleveland entrepreneurial ecosystem. We are telling the stories of its entrepreneurs and those supporting them. Welcome to the Lay of the Land podcast, where we are exploring what people are building in Cleveland. I'm your host, Jeffrey Stern, and today's guest is someone who I've had the pleasure of working with and learning from over the last year as both a partner and collaborator through my time at Actual. Manoj Jhaveri is one of those people who is genuinely kind and who unsolicited will every time go out of his way to be supportive and helpful. My own personal admiration and respect aside, Manoj is the co-founder and CEO of Hyr Medical, a health tech startup based here in Cleveland, Ohio. And Hyr is really on a mission to transform the $18 billion healthcare staffing industry by making it easier for clinicians to find the best freelance opportunities, while simultaneously offering more flexibility for medical practices and other healthcare employers. The growing healthcare freelance economy really presents nuanced challenges and a massive opportunity for a company like Hyr to enable an elastic, on-demand workforce, all of which we're going to explore in much more detail in this conversation. I hope you all enjoy it. To start out, I feel like we have to preface that you and I actually know each other pretty well and have been, working together over the last year on our companies respectively, but also collaboratively. So I'm glad that we can share your story here to the greater Cleveland community and beyond.
Absolutely, man.
Yeah, so I know we'll dive right into Hyr Medical and talk about the problem space and everything that you're doing to solve the problems there. But I want to start with just some personal context setting. Looking back on your career so far, what has been the common thread really that ties your path together in founding a healthcare company?
Yeah, I think for me, I sort of have to go back to my parents and being a son of two immigrants from India who, really grew up in just slum type conditions, extreme poverty. I once visited where they grew up, my mom and dad, when I was like 16. It was one of my first trips to India. I was there for like a month and a half and got to really understand after 16 years, like where they came from. Because I was born in Chicago suburbs. It was the first time it really hit me like, holy crap, this is where they were able to come out from. There's, my dad passed away like 2 years ago, and there's like, you think about all these things like after a parent passes away, like I wish I said this and I wish I said that. Like the thing I wish I could say to my dad is like, how did you come out of that and come to America and even live a middle class lifestyle coming from that background, Mm-hmm. And I mean, he did it because he was top of his class, and my mom also worked really hard and studied hard, and my dad got scholarships to finally, leave India, and he was able to come to Berkeley on a scholarship in 1962. And, my mom and dad were like 20, 21. They had like a totally arranged marriage,
Yeah.
like you see in Indian movies. And I mean, that whole immigrant story. And they would send money back to their family in India, and they just worked really, really hard all the time. So for me, that's where I think a lot of my passion, my work ethic, my desire to do something creative and my common thread, I would say, is problem solving, solving tough problems that are multifaceted and multidisciplinary and thorny. That's always sort of been my common thread. I studied engineering, mechanical, industrial engineering, like early in my career. I worked in semiconductor, aerospace industries, was working on the in the clean rooms in the fabs when I was like right out of college, like all over the world, like in Asia and Germany and all kinds of places. And, was doing like hardcore design and mechanical engineering type work. But then I knew I didn't want to, it was too narrow for me. So I wanted to get more into something that combined business and engineering. Didn't really know that much about business, to be honest with you, but I knew I wanted to do maybe something like management consulting. So ended up moving at that time from Silicon Valley to Cleveland. I mean, I grew up in the Chicago area, but I had lived in Silicon Valley for a little while, was doing engineering there, then came to Ohio, and I bounced around Ohio a little bit, but I eventually settled in Cleveland when I started working for Deloitte, was there for about 8 years, doing product development consulting. So like innovation, product development type work. It was a good like combination of engineering and business skills, getting to combine those two disciplines and help companies with all kinds of interesting challenges, everything from people, process, technology. And then I worked for a couple of years. I wanted to get some time off the road because I was traveling Monday through Thursday, like for 4 days a week of travel.
Sure, the traditional consulting lifestyle.
Every week for like, many, many years. And, at that point, at the end of Deloitte, I had, 2 kids at that point. So I wanted to settle down a little bit. Ended up taking a job locally with Vitamix. I was there for a couple years. Gave me a good chance to think about what I want to do. I knew like Vitamix was not like, I knew I wasn't like I knew I didn't want to be like in a large corporate environment. Although Vitamix was kind of mid-sized, but it gave me a chance to think about what do I want to do. I had very long drives from my home in Cleveland Heights to Vitamix, which was in quite a long ways. It was in Olmsted Township, so it like had a 1 hour there and 1 hour back, and I'd listen to a lot of podcasts and audiobooks, and I sort of credit that time to helping me realize that I want to do something on my own. So then I started my own strategy innovation consulting company after I left Vitamix. Did that for like a year and a half. It was doing pretty well. And then I randomly met Ferris, who is a physician here in Cleveland. I met him at a startup competition. And from there, that's where a lot of things started with Hyr Medical.
Yeah, so that's really interesting because I have a lot of context, working with you over the last year on Hyr, but I realized I didn't actually know the founding story. And so I was wondering, if the idea came or if the founding team came or, what came first. So you and Ferris had met. What were those initial steps like to actually put the idea of Hyr together and, jump into founding and starting a company?
The intent that I had when I first met Ferris and we started working on some projects together was not to start a company or that I want to have a startup in technology and healthcare. It was none of that. Actually, I worked in so many industries when I was at Deloitte. And I mean, I worked in, I did projects for, companies that, I did a project for the Joint Strike Fighter. I did a project for Medtronic. Like I did all kinds of industries, right? And the one industry I never worked in was like healthcare. That was the one thing. And I remember even thinking to myself, like, because I knew people in Cleveland who did healthcare work. I'm like, man, I'll never do healthcare work. Like that's
right.
That's not my thing. Like I do like things like I do projects with like Caterpillar or, semiconductor companies or whatever. But I also think though I'm a very like curious person. So I actually do like just I enjoy learning about areas that I have no knowledge of. So that sort of serves me well. And sometimes when you have a startup, it's an advantage to not have the ingrained knowledge of the industry because then you don't necessarily think about things in the way that everybody else does.
Right.
So
beginner's mindset.
Yeah. So the reason I met Ferris is I signed up for a startup competition. It was very similar to like Startup Weekend. It was modeled after that. And I went there to learn about startup techniques so I could bring them back to my corporate clients for the consulting company that I had. So I was trying to learn more about like lean startup techniques and design thinking and things like that. And I was doing workshops with clients that were large clients, like Fortune 500s, like Campbell Soup and things like that. My intention was not like, I want to have a startup. But then I went to this thing and I didn't have a team. I went by myself. I heard a bunch of people people line up, and they give their pitches, right? And
right.
Ferris gave a pretty good pitch about an idea that he was talking about around like optimization for residency programs and scheduling. And, I had like an operations research background back when I did like, before my MBA, I did a master's in OR. So I was like, yeah, that sounds pretty cool. I know some stuff around that, and ended up working with Ferris over 54 hours. Like you do like a 54-hour hackathon where you don't sleep much and people don't bathe and everyone smells and
it's a
and you're just like working like crazy. And we became friends in that short period of time, and we liked working together, and we pitched together to the judges, and we won first place, which was like really exciting. I mean, they give you like a $2,000 check, and it's like a really gigantic check, and we're like, wow.
Yeah, one of those massive physical.
Yeah. So we were like, wow, that's pretty cool, So then we started working on a few different things together. And we actually formed a company called MedRocket. It's like the worst name, but we formed a company around this residency scheduling software. And we had like a working software and everything. And we started marketing it to residency programs. But there's not like that many I mean, there's like, like 1,000 residency programs in the United States, but it's not like a largely growing market, and it's hard to sell into. And even the software itself didn't maybe you sell it once, and but we didn't think about all those things. We just thought, well, to have a business, you create something and it solves a problem, and then people buy it, and then you have a business. But we didn't think about like all the scalability and the market size and the total addressable market. And like, we just thought it was cool to create this thing that solved the problem, which was a good lesson for us to realize that having a startup is way more than creating a point solution to a problem. Even if it is a really painful problem, that's not enough.
So there was a pivot for MedRocket.
Yeah. So the rocket, let's just say the rocket went up for a little bit, and then it crashed for sure. Actually, the best thing is that, so I still kept running my startup, and Ferris and I on the nights and weekends with another couple people too started working on this project on the side, like a side gig type of project. And I remember we went to some conferences together and all this kind of stuff. And so we didn't really kind of know what we were doing with it. And we ended up finally meeting Matthew Miller, who at that time was at BioEnterprise. That was the best thing, because we'd never really met with any like advisors who knew about startups and raising capital and all this kind of stuff. And I remember like the kindest thing Matthew did is he just told us, he's like, we pitched him and everything, and he's like, guys, this idea is never gonna work. He's like, the market's too small, your margins are like super tiny, this total like, it's like a very point solution, to this need. And even if you fulfill it, like what then, and there's just a lot of different things that he brought up. And we realized that like, it's, maybe it's something you like sell like on an app store or something, but it's not like an entire business that you create around this thing. But the cool thing was that like a few weeks before we met Matthew, Ferris and I remember exactly where we were. We went to a Jumpstart event, and after the event was over, we were sitting in the lobby, and we were talking about Ferris's upcoming shifts, where he was doing a fellowship in GI at Cleveland Clinic, but on the side, he used to do locums work. So locum is a Latin word for standing in the place of somebody else. So oftentimes when a hospital is understaffed, or people are on vacation or maternity or things like that, they use, for example, a resident, or they use someone who likes to do this kind of locums work and fill in the place of other people and doesn't have a W-2 full-time employment. And they'll just kind of borrow from other places. And so he was doing this kind of work, but the more and more we talked about it, the entire process for everything from discovery of the job to the negotiations and the discrimination that often occurs, the dealing with agencies, the haggling, the non-transparency of the entire transaction, the paperwork, the FedEx envelopes and snail mail and faxes and emails and phone calls, the bombardment of phone calls by staffing agencies that he'd often get, and then the credentialing process itself and the privileging, and then finally getting to work somewhere. And it was just like a tremendous amount of pain. And like, I could definitely see it on his face, where it's just like, yeah, he's happy to have these couple assignments. He was working in like Ashtabula and Akron General, but like was not in a consumer friendly process.
Right.
By any means. It was just pain. And so we created a little like pitch deck around what if we were able to like make this entire process like a consumer friendly process, and like with the doctor at the center, and make it so that the process was even enjoyable and streamlined, and leverage technology that, because we noticed that there's no innovation in this space since like 1990,
Right.
and
right.
it's like, there's so much low hanging fruit here. There's got to be some opportunity that other people are looking at. So of course we started looking at other companies that are doing things in this space, but we didn't really find a lot. So then when we met with Matthew that first time, we had that in our back pocket. And I remember that day we said, well, there's this other thing that we've been like fooling around with. And at the time it was called, the name of the company was HIGHER, like Hyr.
Hyr. Oh my God.
It wasn't even HYR. And it was like this like hokey logo. And it was like this, we showed it to him. He's like, you know what? You guys are not complete idiots after all. Like, this is actually a pretty good idea, He's like, well, maybe work on this a little bit more, and then like come talk to me again. And then we just kept annoying him, and we kept coming back, and we're like, well, we have a little bit more research that we've done. We have a little bit more research that we've done. And the little snowball started getting bigger and bigger. And then finally, I started becoming so obsessed with Hyr Medical that I said, you know what? I'm not even thinking about my consulting company. I'm thinking more about this and my obsession with Hyr Medical. Let me just shut down my consulting company. So I think in the middle of 2017, I completely shut down my consulting business. And I said, I'm just going to go all in with this company, which was weird because when I look back at it, it's like I couldn't pay myself anything with the company. I was like, oh, I'll just live off of some of my savings and I'll empty out my 401k. And it was a weird time in my life too, because I was also going through a divorce at the exact same time all this was happening. So maybe I was having a midlife crisis or something. I don't know. But there was a lot of shit going on at that time in my life.
Yeah.
And I was navigating, the fact that, I was living in my house by myself, in the house that my ex-wife and I lived in for like 14 years together, where we raised our kids there. And then now all of a sudden my kids were sharing time between my house and her house. And it was like this weird alternate universe. And then I like have this startup, and I had money coming in from my consulting business, and something made me say, you know what? I'm just gonna do something crazy, and why not? Life is short.
Life is short. So what is Hyr Medical? What is this creation?
I mean, at its core, the way I like to describe it now is it's a solution, and it is all about enabling an elastic on-demand workforce. And that is something that helps providers because, and I mean, this was pre-COVID, obviously, and everything, but even more so now, you see that providers are really starving for more autonomy, flexibility, and freedom in their life. Not only that, the future of work is, definitely upon us, and, work from home culture and all these things, and doctors and NPs and PAs and the like are seeing their friends and other people have flexibility in how they work. And so it's no wonder that, more doctors want to be able to do telemedicine, and it's no wonder that they want to be able to split their time in different modes of home and work and, clinic and everything, right? And they want to have more ownership of their career and more flexibility and more freedom, and be able to say, hey, I want to take a couple months off and go travel overseas, and then I want to resume working as a doctor. And, I want to have, not every doctor is like that, and not every provider is like that, but a lot more are like that. And you have a freelance economy that's growing and growing. You have 59 million people in the US doing freelance work, and it's not only Uber drivers, right? It's people who are highly, highly skilled professions, like physicians, like software developers, all kinds of things, right? Highly educated people. So when the idea of being a locum first started in 1970, it started, I think, in Utah. At that time in the world, being a locum was considered like, oh, you're a locum, like you can't find a real job, You must be a bottom of the barrel type of doctor who's like not as good as other people. And maybe there was some truth to that at that time. But I mean, fast forward 50 years, that's not the case at all. And so we're providing a platform, a software platform, and an overall experience that allows providers and employers to connect directly, transparently, quickly, automate many portions of the credentialing process, which is obviously where the partnership with Actual comes in big time. And there's still, a lot of work to still do there. And there's just many other things that I haven't even mentioned. But it's not only for the sake of the provider that we want to create an elastic on-demand workforce. It's also for the sake of the employer, right? Because look at something like COVID, right? You had surges in localized areas all over the country ebbing and flowing, and you have more demand somewhere and less demand somewhere else. And you don't have most hospitals were staffed with either, medical groups that contract with them, or they have a large employed workforce of W-2s. So then COVID hit, then ER volume and hospital floor volume went down. So they started laying off or furloughing people. But see, if they had like 20 to 30% of their workforce as just contingent to begin with, they could have actually flexed it up and down without having to do a lot of those things, right? I think more of recognition is coming around that. But also you have massive shortages all over the country, especially in rural areas, non-metro areas where there's just not enough providers, right?
Right. And that's a growing problem.
That's a growing problem. And the number of people going through medical school is totally outpacing the amount of residency spots. And that's a government issue. The opening up more spots in terms of residency programs and being able to fund doctors to teach residency programs and all those things. It's a solvable problem, but in many cases our government is in gridlock over things like this. So the shortage of just the raw shortage, right, of providers is growing and growing. But then the real problem is the allocation of supply and demand, right? You have a place like Cleveland that is saturated with providers. They have no issue. Cleveland Clinic does not have like massive issues. Yeah, and they have a residency program too, right? So they can have people moonlight and fill in extra shifts, right? But you take a place like Findlay, Ohio, they don't have that luxury, right? And they have W-2 staff, but they have to augment it with a layer of contingent people who are freelancers. And so we really call that contingent, right? You're not filling in the place of somebody who's missing. You're there because if you're not there, the hospital can't have the same amount of throughput.
Right. Meeting the demand.
Yeah, or even worse, if you don't have the same amount of throughput, when what hospital administrators are often going to say is, okay, well, we need to have the same amount of throughput. So, well, if you're going to have the same amount of throughput with fewer doctors than you actually need to be staffed with, then those doctors are going to get worked more. And that's where you always hear about burnout, right? Physician burnout is a huge problem. And the suicide rate is twice the average in America and all these types of things, right? And then it got exacerbated during something like COVID, right? So what really the way I like to think about it, and I actually, because of my operations background and supply chain background and all these things, there's a massive supply chain issue in this whole thing. It's the staffing supply chain. And the ability to move supply to where the demand is very limited. Some of it is because of self-imposed things where we shoot ourselves in the foot, like not being able to have a single national medical license, right? So it's like, okay, I have a ton of doctors who live in Missouri, but they can't practice in Kansas because they don't have a Kansas license. It's like, right. It's like, come on, but there should just be one national medical license, but there's not. And now with telemedicine, it's starting to kind of bubble up. There's this thing called the Interstate Medical License Compact, but it's a long ways to go. So there's not a fluidity because of regulations, but there's also the biggest problem is not the regulation fluidity. The biggest problem is things like credentialing and the amount of time it takes, 3 to 6 months, over 100 days to credential a doctor. Lots of like manual processes and med staff offices having to call up and verify the same facts over and over again. Every place a doctor wants to work. This is obviously a problem you guys know very, very well at Actual.
Sounds familiar.
As the problem you guys are trying to solve. So, and then, ultimately, right, this elastic on-demand workforce that we're trying to enable with technology and better process, that's really what Hyr Medical is all about. It benefits the provider. So I kind of described that. It benefits the employer because then they can have adequate throughput, which therefore translates into revenue for the hospital.
Right.
Without destroying their workforce and having people leave and having turnover and having people have mental health problems, because lots of doctors have mental health crisis that they're going through right now too. And then ultimately you serve patients better, right? You have less malpractice. You have less issues happen because you have people who are fresh and able to work, and you have a well-staffed, well-running machine, right? So at the heart of it, Hyr Medical is we tend to start by talking about the provider, but it's helping the employer. It's creating a machine that's much more efficient. And it happens to be that the very first place that we're starting this foothold is in the freelance market. So, but we have ambitions to go beyond only having a person, like one provider being a freelancer at a single location or multiple locations. Ultimately, the benefit of having a vetted high quality workforce on Hyr Medical is that now that workforce can ultimately self-assemble in ways that we haven't even fully thought out, where they can form maybe a virtual group of practice and serve clients on our network that need that type of care, right? Maybe they don't need one GI doctor, maybe they need 5 GI doctors, right? And they can organize in a certain way. So anyway, pretty long-winded, but that is the whole thing in a nutshell, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. I mean, the benefits are evident for the doctors, for the clinicians, for the healthcare organizations. The macro prospects are there. You have this proliferation of locum tenens over the last 50 years or so. You have this growing physicians shortage. But then ultimately, the way I kind of think about Hyr is as this marketplace, if you will, right? Mm-hmm. It's difficult to bring together this supply with the physicians, the nurses, the practitioners with this demand for work. And so at scale, it seems to me it's inevitable. Something like Hyr has to exist in the future. How do you surmount the initial challenges of building that marketplace and tying those pieces together?
Yeah, I mean, this is my first time as a CEO of a startup. And of course, I picked like a marketplace business, which is one of the hardest kinds of startups to create. But I guess I like trying to solve hard problems. But yeah, I mean, marketplaces are hard to build because you have to get enough critical mass on both sides to get the flywheel moving. We've been able to, after like years of grinding, I mean, now we have over 1,000 providers on the network, and we have over 30 clients, healthcare systems, medical groups on the network. And that's helping because now our sales cycle is shorter. More natural matches can occur between our algorithm can match people up easier between providers and open needs. And we can focus on so many of the other parts of this whole supply chain issue and the entire revenue wheel, everything from getting clients onto the platform and getting, opportunities posted and matching people up for opportunities and sending communications automatically. Now we're able to do a lot of those things automatically. And then ultimately moving the credentialing process forward and then getting all the way to finally completed shifts and assignments. And ultimately that's how we generate revenue. It's only when providers actually provide service, when they deliver care, is when Hyr Medical invoices our clients and pays our providers. So the providers on Hyr Medical are all 1099s to Hyr Medical. So there's a lot of different parts to the overall machine. I don't think that we've fully surmounted the whole thing yet. I mean, it's hard building a network. A two-sided marketplace is hard to build. And I mean, this well. I mean, Actual is like a 3-sided network actually. So
Yep.
So
also like hard problems over here.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, there are a lot of things we have to do. One of the things that we have as a big initiative is to make it easier to onboard clients, new providers to join the network, right? I mean, think of something like Airbnb. A guest can easily create a profile and sign up and start searching for places to stay. And a host can fully onboard themselves and sign a contract and start, listing their location and all that type of thing. And, we're really stronger on the provider side and they can self-service completely. We need to ultimately get there on the employer side where they can self-service completely. Some segments of the market are there where employers would do that. There are others that are still not fully, I don't think, caught up. And this concept of doing things this way still isn't familiar enough to some folks where it's like, oh yeah, we would go on to Hyr and we would post these needs and we'd get matched up and we'd check our dashboard and we do credentialing in an automated way. And I mean, as you know, that's just not how this industry works right now. So some of what we do, we have to do to survive and generate revenue, but we're always having an eye on the future and how do we have to evolve our solution. And, ultimately, we probably will get more picky about the kinds of clients we work with because of the speed at which they're willing to move. I don't think we're quite there yet. I mean, this is where you get in the challenge of balancing, like, you got to have immediate revenue and you need some revenue to get investors excited and to come along and feel like, okay, these guys need more fuel and then they can do even more,
It's the catch-22 of early stage startups.
Yeah. So, we have some elements of product market fit. I think there's still so much more that I think we need to do to fully say like we have total product market fit, just being very honest, but we're getting there. We're getting there.
Yeah. I mean, the self-service model is highly differentiated from the traditional staffing industry, which, as I understand it, is notoriously competitive, cutthroat even. I'm curious how you think about Hyr, strategically differentiated from the traditional staffing company and kind of leveraging technology and, all these efficiencies that you're working towards relative to how, historically this industry has worked.
Yeah. I mean, for one thing, obviously bringing technology to bear in itself in this industry, I think is a differentiator. I don't mean
unfortunately.
That. Yeah, I mean it's just an industry that hasn't evolved, and it's kind of like I was listening to this podcast today in health. It was a really smart woman talking about healthcare challenges, and she said, everyone knows this annoying problem. Like when you go to a doctor that you've been seeing for like years, you walk into the office and they give you that piece of paper with the clipboard, and they want to scan your insurance card and your driver's license. It's like they've never met you before. It's like, but I've been coming here for like 5 years. Like, why is the consumer experience so terrible? And why does Amazon know, like, why am I able to go onto Amazon and like immediately they recognize me? And not only that, they know what my kids want to buy. And they know what my friends want to buy, and they know like what to present me with, and they have all this data, and they don't ask for the same stuff over and over again. And, like the consumer experience is very, very front and center. And in healthcare, it's not. The whole patient-centric thing that everybody talks about, like the clipboard thing is like the worst patient-centric experience I can imagine. It's like, what are you doing to me? Like, this is awful.
It's not enjoyable.
So, I think there's a lot of evolution in that area. I think you're starting to see it in things like in Columbus, like the InsurTech technology that's happening. Like you're starting to see that, like, there's almost like like I love Root. Like I use Root, and it's almost like a fun experience to use Root, but it took a long time for insurance to kind of become somewhat consumer friendly and fun.
Right. And still some sense of empathy.
Yeah.
The whole process.
So I think that's kind of where healthcare is at. It's like, I mean, it has a long way to go to kind of be more consumer centric in that way. And then also when I think about something like staffing, to be provider centric, right? And that's something that Actual is trying to solve too. It's like put the provider in control, allow them to have a digital wallet of all their important credentials, because this is the lifeblood of their career. And that's not how healthcare staffing works today, or even just normal W-2 employment or re-credentialing of current employees, right? It's actually a painful process, even when you're within the same system year after year, and every 2 years you have to get re-credentialed. So I think the more we think about things where we put the right person in the center of the experience, that's how you start to at least crack this. So yeah, I mean, important for us to bring technology to it, but it's also a lot about process, smart process, and really thinking through what the experience should be for the provider, for the employer.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. I kind of want to segue here to some personal learnings and reflections. Over the last few years, have you gone through the process of building Hyr to where it is today? being a first time CEO, what have you learned from this process?
Oh man, I don't even know where to begin. It's like the most accelerated learning process I've ever had in my life. I actually did complete my MBA before, like right before I started Hyr Medical. It's like they always talk about like, if you do an MBA, but like being a CEO of a company is like a real world MBA because you really are involved in every part of the business, especially in the first few years. And you need to be, I think, but also you have to be because you're short on resources and you have to understand and have a pulse on everything that's happening in the company. You can't do it all. I mean, I think I've at least tried, and I think I've done a better job of, providing support, but allowing others to execute. And I don't think you can be a good leader if you don't allow others to execute, but then provide support, where it's needed and help build good processes that people can follow and that are repeatable, and having open dialogue and communication. I think the hardest thing that I've had to struggle with, or I don't think I've overcome it by any means. I think it's one of those things where I listen to this podcast, Radical Candor, a lot, and it's a really good podcast on leadership and they have like this quadrant model where they talk about, in the top right quadrant, you care personally, but you challenge directly. And for me, that is something I try to do every day. I'm not always successful, but I really try to show the person I really care about you and your career progression, and I have something I need to tell you that will help you be more effective. And it's because of the fact that I'm being so straightforward with you and honest about where you're falling short. That is a reflection of how much I care about you too. That's a hard thing to do as a leader, but I think the really good leaders I've seen are able to do that. Like, man, I love you, Manoj. Like, you're an awesome guy. You care so much, but I want to see you do this, and this differently, And like, if you can show that and do that with like empathy, then I think people will follow you.
Mm.
But it's if you fall into any of those other three quadrants, right? So like I think one of the quadrants is called ruinous empathy, where like you care personally, but you don't challenge directly. Like, I really care about you, but in my way of showing I care about you, I'm not going to like tell you things like that are too direct. So
ruinous
empathy. I don't know. I can't remember the names of the other two quadrants, but basically it's just not a place you want to be.
Yeah. No, I will say, like, a lot of things are connecting for me, I think, about your story. From my perspective, I feel like you are a true maven and like connector of people and like bringing people up. It's just something I've noticed working with you over the last year. And I was curious how you think about networking and curating your time with great people, because I feel like you are very intentional about that.
Yeah. You know what though? I think I have a decent amount of humbleness to know that I'm generally not the smartest person in the room. And I, like when I look at a place like Hyr, like, and the people I get to work with and stuff, I'm genuinely curious and I like to see the way they think. Like, I work with, obviously my co-founders, Oliver and Ferris. We're like very different personalities, but both of those guys are like smart as shit, like in their own different ways. And I don't know, like, I'm not saying this in like a negative way towards myself, but I guess I'm like, well, I don't think of myself as like a brilliant guy or anything. Like, I really don't. I am a very curious person, and I like having conversations with people who, are really like thoughtful, deep thinkers and fun to be around. And I think the way I network with people is just with a genuine curiosity to learn and also to kind of extend my own experiences in life. And I think I just genuinely enjoy it. I don't know how, maybe I'm intentional and it's just kind of ingrained in me at this point. There's probably some intentionality about it. I think I like being around people who enjoy solving problems and who have a certain kind of grit and determination, and they're doing things outside of just beyond their own like gratification or, their own glorification, I think. Like they're very purpose driven,
Right.
Yeah.
I'm curious how, in your worldly travels and arrival here in Cleveland, bringing it back to Cleveland, what is it about Cleveland that, ultimately that you're here building Hyr in Cleveland, and again, from my perspective, are like a champion of Cleveland and the startup scene and the entrepreneurship around here.
Yeah,
really a champion of it.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. Man, I don't know. I mean, I think the time I came here 14 years ago. I still remember because my son he's 14 and he was a baby. Like, I remember, we bought our first house and he was like in his little car seat. And it's like a second home for me because I grew up in Chicago suburbs and like now I think of Cleveland as like this, like my home, and it's like a mini Chicago in some ways. But I've gotten to know Cleveland better than I ever did get to know Chicago. People are very accessible and people are very like, willing to help each other. And, there's no way like this company would be where it is. Like I have to say a shout out to all the advisors that we have. Charlie Lougheed and Matthew Miller, Gene Groyce, Nick Barrett, another advisor of ours is in Florida, Sunil Pandya. Like having these advisors, like they will tell us like when our baby is ugly and like when we are just
that
going
radical
down.
Candor.
Yes. And they care about us deeply. See, we never feel like they don't care about us deeply, but they will tell us like the really hard truth. And they've told us it's like, because we don't want you to waste your time. And we don't want to see you fail. Like, so if our strategy for product development is all screwed up, or we're not well prepared enough, or if our fundraising plan sucks, like, or whatever it might be, like, they're just going to tell us like, and it's hard sometimes to hear, but then you're like, man, they're freaking right. So like, just so many people have like, I feel like welcomed me to this city. And even when I was at Deloitte, I mean, it was like an amazing environment of people. And so I started out here at Deloitte and like, I just continued to grow with the city. And I just feel like such a closeness to it because of probably all the people who have just helped me grow along the way and have really just like cared about me and believed in me.
Yeah.
So even in my worst times, like believed in me.
That's awesome to hear. And get into the nitty gritty of Cleveland. A question that we are asking everyone coming on is for their, not necessarily their favorite thing, but for a hidden gem, something that other people may not know about, but is particularly special to them about Cleveland.
Yeah, it's not directly in Cleveland, but it's in driving distance from Cleveland. I really like going to Lakeside. I have a good friend of mine, Ben Linville, who has a restaurant in Lakeside too. So Lakeside, if you don't know, is like have you ever been there?
I've been to Lakeside.
So it's a gated community. It was started by the Methodists. I think they went there because to kind of like avoid like persecution. So they kind of set up their own community there. And then like over time, it's evolved into this like really kind of awesome, I think it's called like a Chautauqua. I don't really know. Like there's so many Chautauquas all over the US or whatever. There's only so many. And it's like this like utopian, I mean, I know it's not, but it seems to me like when you go there, it's like this utopian society. It's like, there's like basketball courts everywhere and, there's not too many restaurants. Like in order to have a restaurant there, like it took my friend like 5 years to like get a permit to have his own restaurant there.
Oh, wow.
And there's only like 5 restaurants in the whole, like it's a square mile. People just go there and hang out. And it's just it's a very unique place, very relaxing. You can take your kids there and like, play on it's right on the Lake Erie. So you can like play in Lake Erie and you can go do water sports and you can play basketball there and get food and.
Yeah. Oh, it sounds awesome. I'm building this bucket list of all the hidden gems that I have not been able to go to. And as the world opens up, I'm looking forward to exploring a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, if you go to Lakeside too, it's not too hard to go to Kelly's Island and all those different things around there too, which are also really cool too.
Yeah, absolutely. I personally have really enjoyed this conversation. It's been cool kind of filling in the gaps of Hyr that I didn't know existed, but are really interesting. So I really appreciate you coming on, Manoj, and sharing your story.
Cool, man. And the partnership with Actual, I have to say, is amazing. So maybe I should like interview you sometime. Someone's got to interview you because the story with Actual is also pretty awesome.
Well, we'll get there someday.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, if people, clinicians, hospitals, whoever it is, wants to follow up with you on anything that we talked about, where is the best place for them to find you?
You can always send me an email, mjhaveri@hyrmed.com. It's just mjhaveri@hyrmed.com. You can also email info@hyrmed.com, or you can go to our website, www.hyrmed.com.
That's all for this week. Thanks for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show, so shoot us an email at layoftheland@upside.fm, or find us on Twitter at podlayoftheland, @thetegan, or at sternhefe, JEFE. We'll be back here next week at the same time to map more of the land. If you or someone you know would make a good guest for our show, please email us or find us on Twitter and let us know. And if you love our show, please leave a review on iTunes. That goes a long way in helping us spread the word and continue to help bring high-quality guests to the show. Tegan Horden and Jeffrey Stern developed the Lay of the Land podcast in collaboration with the Up Company, LLC. At the time of this recording, we do not own equity or other financial interests in the companies which appear on this show unless otherwise indicated. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Founders Get Funds and its affiliates, or Actual and its affiliates, or any entity which employs us. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. We have not considered your specific financial situation, nor provided any investment advice on this show. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.